Welcome to the show, Cara.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I'm a long-time listener, first-time guest, so very, very excited to be here.
Yay! Likewise. Okay, I want to jump right in because this topic is so timely and so interesting. So before we get into the case study, though, I want to start with maybe something a little more foundational. So the word community gets thrown around a lot in marketing. So how do you define community when it comes to customers or partners? Like, what makes something a true community versus just an audience?
Yeah. I think the way we define community is shifting. It used to be that we think big audiences, the bigger the better, especially on social. How can we get this bigger audience? But now we're seeing a shift towards much more relevance. Members want to feel like they belong. I think you mentioned in your intro, they really want to feel it. So think about the fitness industry. I joined a gym 15, 20 years ago, and it was a gym that had everything. I would go and work out. I would leave. There didn't really feel like there was a sense of community. Fast forward to today, there's so many more options. I personally attend Bar 3, which is a mix of Pilates, ballet, and yoga. And it specializes in women and women of a similar age and demographic of myself. So it makes it really feel personal. It's a very personal experience. I actually get a chance to connect with the teachers. I connect with the people, and I've actually made some really good friends. So I think that's the difference. The biggest difference is not necessarily just messaging out. The difference in communities now is like having a shared purpose for them to interact with each other.
I love that. Shared purpose. Plus, you look around and you're like, these people are just like me. Not maybe not necessarily like look like you, quote unquote, because obviously many communities can be online. So you may not actually see them. But I'm thinking even to like Reddit communities, right? I have no idea who those people are, what they look like, other than just some, silly handle that they created. But again, back to your point of like shared purpose and making it personal. And I think the belonging piece is especially important here, right? So now let's ground that definition in taking us back to your time at Expedia. So ahead of this recording, when we were doing our prep call for this, we talked a lot about your time at Expedia and Expedia's travel agent affiliate program, or TAP. So explain to us now how community shows up wrapped around in that context, and tell us a little bit more about who are these advisors and what was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So TAP is Expedia's B2B platform designed for travel advisors. Travel advisors are also known as travel agents, if you didn't know that. They're mostly independent business owners. So there are some consortiums and the like, but they're mostly individual business owners that are booking travel for a client. We are about 200,000 of them globally. So we had reach, but they weren't necessarily using our platform exclusively. They had multiple tools on their desktop, and the needs of the day and the client really, that's what drove them to use a particular tool over another. And so community showed up really differently here. We weren't just supporting the end user, we were supporting the business owners in helping to make that decision. Where to book, how to learn, and really who to trust.
Got it. Okay. So the trust factor. And again, I'm thinking back to like shared purpose, right? So with that context now, digging a little deeper into the case study, I guess walk us through the time when you were trying to increase engagement now. And I think what you were saying before in our prep call was like around like share of wallet, right? Like when you were trying to build some of that share of wallet from travel advisors, leveraging the TAP, I'm calling it. What was happening and how did you decide what to do?
Yeah. Great question. So we were in a place, as I mentioned before, that travel advisors had many tools to be able to select from. We had the reach, but we didn't necessarily we weren't necessarily their go-to platform. And so the goal was to increase share of wallet. Essentially what that means is the usage of the platform and in turn revenue, And then also to close some knowledge gaps. We actually had a lot of different tools and features that I don't think the travel advisors were aware of at the time. So those are kind of our two goals, is share of wallet and knowledge gaps. We also had the unique challenge that they were so globally dispersed, right? So we couldn't necessarily just do something small. We wanted to do something that was personal, but also something that was scalable so we could educate them and connect them. So we decided to build some smaller niche communities. We kind of looked at our audience and we did some surveys really to find out, what their niches were, and organized some smaller groups based on their shared challenges and then interests. And then we layered on a few different channels to bring them together and then provide content. So we did targeted webinars. We created more relevant content based on the topics that they wanted to discuss. We brought in our sales team, so they were much more connected to not only understanding, what they wanted, but why. Why did they want these particular things? We did content in terms of sharing out advisor trends and insights, really kind of what are the booking trends so we could help them with their business, really understanding how to grow that. We did create a formal LMS for more structured learning, which was very well received.
And real quick, just for listeners / myself who may not know, what is LMS?
Oh, good call. It is a learning management system. So think of it as like an educational tool where you can put up, it's kind of a knowledge bank of learning.
Yes. Okay. Makes perfect sense, especially as you were talking about the content that you were creating and providing. Got it. Okay.
Yes. Good call. Yes. And so that was well received because it really opened up their eyes to the services and products that we had that they just weren't really aware of. Not that the product was very complex, but they're in their day-to-day. We also brought some of the members into some of our internal events. We had some big Expedia partnership events, which we had never brought the travel advisors to before. And so we started to bring them into those as well. And the combination of those is really where things started to click. Because not only were they interested in what we had to say, it became much more peer driven. Advisors were helping each other. They were sharing best practices and tips, which really that's what made the community valuable. And from there, we saw an increase in overall satisfaction, a better product understanding. We did see our increase of share of wallet. And I think the other benefit that we hadn't necessarily had a goal of is we also better understood where our product gaps were, which also in turn helped the share of wallet because we could fill those gaps easier by being surfaced much quicker.
What I am seeing as you're describing the different strategies and tactics that you used is that there's an organic evolution here that started with you being super customer centric, trying to fill the knowledge gaps, creating the content, and you had this a feedback loop of, like you mentioned, trends and insights that were coming from the people that you were speaking to, and then you're feeding it back. And then the more that you brought your customers in, and then I guess it led to, I think you said events or, customer conferences or something is the gist that I got. And then you actually got to see them talk to each other. It seems like it just snowballed from there in terms of, there's something even bigger that we can unlock here and tap into by making this conversation not just an A and B conversation, but an A, B, and C conversation, which gets really interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say it definitely moved from we're just going to give you content to you're going to help us create this content. And then that moved into you're going to help us create this content, but then you're also going to share it with the other people in your network. And it just really became this forum, and not really a forum, but a community of learnings. And it really helped us to get the knowledge out there on why and how they should use the product.
Yeah. And that's tapping into something that I think is so authentically human. Innately, humans have a bit of altruistic tendencies. We all do, to some degree, some more than others. We want to be helpful to other people. we also like to be seen as experts. We like to, it gives us a feeling of satisfaction, fulfillment when it feels like not only are we helping someone else, but we're using our expertise to do so. So it feels like you've tapped into that with this community.
Yeah, and I think you want to hear from like-minded people. I think there's so many companies that have capitalized on this, right? You think of things like Angie's List, or you even think of things like TripAdvisor, and I think reviews is a big piece of this as well. That's kind of that user-generated content. But when you can get it from people that you trust, and those are the people that are usually in your, I don't want to say like-minded, but usually in that area where they're an expert, you want to be able to tap into that.
Exactly. I think that's why that works so well, in very similar to what you created at Expedia with this TAP group, right? These like strategic travel advisors, is that you found these individuals who were those experts, who were trusted, and they became a voice of the product, basically.
Yeah.
Which is so
sure.
great.
And they became very good advocates. It was great.
And they got something out of it too, right? Like it's all part of like advancing their own expertise and leadership as well. Okay, so now what I want to do is take your case study and turn it into a playbook. So let's say that I'm a product marketer obviously with a product, but with a goal of trying to engage my customers and create community around them. And you're my coach for this. You're going to coach me through this exercise. So what is step one? What's the first thing that I should do? Assume I'm starting from nothing, but I do have customers who are, love the product.
I think the first step is, what is your intention, right? What are you trying to solve? What is the business goal that it's tied to? Really start with that, because a community that's built around education or product adoption or advocacy are going to all look a little bit different, right? And so you want to figure out, like, what's that core goal that you want to think about? For example, when I was working at Zen Planner, which is one of the clients that I consulted with, they're a fitness and wellness company. We created a community of fitness owners that use our marketing features that we have. And we invited them in to talk about growth and marketing strategy. And we did some, feature plugs and really helped them kind of overcome any challenges with the product. But the thing that worked really well there is owners started learning from other owners in terms of what they're doing in terms of marketing and strategy. And so, an owner in Minneapolis could learn from an owner in Los Angeles, and they could say, here's what I'm doing to drive more signups. And it felt, coming back to the same TAP example, there's that trust there. It felt like you're getting it from experts. And so that worked really well. And I think that's where sometimes teams can go wrong, is they start with the community. Let's build a community, and not necessarily with what are our goals for the community. So that's my first step. Get clear.
They jump right in, start building, which, got to give them props for eagerness.
Yes. Yeah. And, we do that in the marketing world, right? We want to move fast. And so it's not a matter of moving fast. It's just a matter of moving fast in the right direction.
Yeah. And being clear on what we're doing this for, because as you're building the community and building out, whether it's incentives or, the methods by which you want the community to engage with one another, all of that can reinforce whatever your goal is. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So assume I'm building my community. I've got my primary goal, what I'm trying to do with this community. What comes next?
Your audience. Who do you want to be in your community? Like, who exactly is it for? What problem are they trying to solve? The more specific here you can get is the better. I like to say, niche drives relevance, and relevance drives engagement. So when people feel like, hey, this is for me, they're so much more willing to show up and participate. And so start small and build from there.
Okay, so that might be a little counterintuitive, but to actually start really niche you could actually see a bit more traction with that. Is that what you're kind of saying from the beginning?
Yes, I think that it gets into when you start small, you have a better understanding of what the community needs, and then you can build it out from there.
Okay. So instead of all customers, it's like, no, this very specific segment of customers. Maybe start with that first and then slowly start to build and expand from there.
Yeah, there's a few different studies on this. I think there's an HBR study and some others that really talk more about these niche markets. I think if you're just trying to get marketing messages out, we're just trying to get things out, a broader community is fine. I still think as a product marketer, you need to be able to speak to your ICP in a way that's not too broad. They need to know that you understand them. But I think when you're building a community that's more about some other type of business goal, really starting small is the way to go.
Got it. Okay. So as soon as you figure out who it's for, how do you decide where the community should live?
It's a good question. You definitely need to think of the right channel. And this comes down to the behavior of your audience. You want to understand where they're already spending their time, where are they already engaging. It could be webinars, forums, messaging apps, even in person. We did that at Expedia, as I mentioned. But the goal is to reduce friction. You want to meet them where they already are, not try to get them to go elsewhere.
Okay. And then quick follow-up to that. I hope this doesn't go off in too big of a tangent. But when you're doing some of that research of figuring out where they already are, hopefully you have it already. But what if I don't have that already? What's a good way to run some experiments, or where can I do the research to figure out where they engage? Is it, okay, I don't want to feed you. You tell me, where do I go?
Yeah, I think it varies. And that's why you have to think of the customer behavior. It could be something as easy as, doing some desk research and really finding out, the travel advisors, for example, they attend these particular events. And when they're at those events, we want to pull them into some private events. It could be, you start there. It could be selecting an audience and then interview, or sorry, not necessarily interviewing, but surveying them. Like, where do you engage, right? And then you can get some of that information up front. And then, you kind of iterate on that.
You test a little bit. Sure. Yeah. Okay. So assume that I found my place. I did my research and I found my place where my community is going to live. So what do I do next?
I like to treat the community like a product. So pilot, we've talked about this a little bit, but I'll just do a little bit of recap. Pilot with a smaller group first so you can really understand what the learnings are. You can test different formats, different cadences, and really find out what drives engagement. And then you can iterate from there. I think the key thing is like, what are they actually doing versus having in your head what you expected them to do? Because sometimes those two things are not always the same.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And you made me think of something else too, just as you were talking. So at the very beginning, you told me that the first step should be to make sure that I have an intention and a goal with what I'm trying to do with the community. I think, and maybe this comes out in the pilot, or maybe it comes out in some of the research that you do, but you also have to make sure that your goal with the community isn't like an indirect conflict with what your community members' goals are in joining the community. Because it has to somewhat, I'm guessing, this is a hypothesis, but I'm guessing it has to somewhat align. Like if I'm thinking back to your Expedia example, the community members were trying to learn and your goal was to educate, right? So not only were you educating them, but then they were educating each other because their goal was to learn. So I'm thinking in like a similar situation, like we should probably uncover some of that, making sure that, their goals it resonates, right?
You're so right. I mean, those two things have to be aligned. What I will say though, is at Expedia, our goal in a nutshell is really to expand share of wallet. Yeah, I was going to say that wasn't necessarily the goal for advisors. I mean, the goal for advisors, they want more revenue from their clients and they want to use a tool that is the most efficient. But sending us more share of wallet was definitely not theirs. And so that's why we felt that one way to get, this is based on data and kind of some voice of customer stuff. But we felt that a better way to get that share of wallet was based on education and sharing. And so that's how we tied our business goal to what the goals of the audience are, because they have to be the same. I mean, you can have some kind of secondary pieces, but if you're talking about something over here and they don't care about it at all, that's not going to work.
Yes. So there's there's the business goal of why we're doing this. And then there's like the motivations behind why should I join? That's kind of a level deeper than everyone's honestly, genuinely in the most, with the most integrity possible. Everyone's out here just trying to make a buck. Right. So, but a level deeper than that, when we're igniting our passions and using our talents and skills, like what is that motivating factor, that more intrinsic motivating factor? It sounds like you were able to kind of uncover and tap into that. So now moving on to, I'm ready to launch my community, but how do I measure to make sure that it's actually working?
It's a good question. So you want to look at participation. Are people showing up? Are they engaging? But not only participation, because sometimes people show up and, maybe they're not really engaging. So I also think about the quality of the engagement. What are the conversations like? What are the themes that are coming out of those? For example, when I first launched Between Launches, which I think sounds so funny, launch between lunches, but I ran a survey to the audience to find out more about what they cared about, because I had ideas. I'd been kind of thinking about this idea for a long time when I was in-house, because as a leader, oftentimes you get into a senior leader position in an organization and you're maybe one of two. And so it's really nice to have an audience that you can go bounce ideas off of. And so I had some ideas in my head in terms of topics I thought would be really interesting, but I wanted to make sure my audience would think those are interesting too. So I started out with, a couple of things that they could just select. And then I, opened it up, and then I got additional information. I mean, AI rated really high on that list, as it's the buzzword in the industry at the moment. And so that allowed me to understand the topics so I can select speakers moving forward, topics the audience really wanted to dig into. I mean, at the end of the day, when you're thinking community, if members feel that the topics are relevant, that's when they'll keep coming back.
Got it. Yes. It's almost, and I think you mentioned this at the beginning, right? You talked about treating community like it's a product, and you're in looking at what you're suggesting of how to measure and then maintain engagement. You're doing a lot of that, like product adoption and product usage, measurements. So that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So I also love that in your story, the community became self-reinforcing once these advisors started actually helping each other out. So talk a little bit more about that and why it's important.
Yes, I think that's when you really know that it's working or not. Peer-to-peer support for me is the unlock. One thing, it reduces the dependency on the organization to always, create every interaction. And I think we talked about this earlier, is it builds a lot more trust and credibility, because it's really, the experts and the members that you see as peers getting that kind of flywheel of conversation going. And so yeah, I think that's one of the biggest unlocks, is when we can get them talking with each other and sharing.
I love it. And that'll just continue to give you even more ideas of how to further engage and, keep the adoption growing. You mentioned AI earlier, that you had fielded, you did a little bit of research, surveyed the prospective members, and AI was a hot topic. So on the subject of AI, because we can't have a podcast without talking about AI these days. So where does AI fit into a community-driven strategy?
I think AI can play a really helpful role in terms of enabling, being an enabler. I think this is the way many PMMs are using AI in general, but it's great for things like summarizing feedback or identifying patterns across conversations, or even helping with the communication and content. But the core thing to community is human connection. So we just can't lose that. You know, we don't want AI to replace that. That's what really makes the community valuable. Another benefit of AI and communities is the insights that come out of the community. They can become a content strategy on their own, shaping how the company shows up in LLMs and making it easier for your prospects to find you. That's a key piece that I think the more that we can get out, the more testimonials, more case studies, the more information we can get out of those groups, we can, feed them into the LLMs and make us much more discoverable.
You just mentioned what I think is going to be like a bombshell of eagerness. Now every company is going to want a community with like, wait, what? We can show up in LLMs? What did she say? Like,
I'm sure there's another session on how to do that, but that's how I've been thinking about it.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, because in this world, like everything sounds, it's a little like too polished. Everything sounds a little too perfect. And I think, the sus meter is like, who is that? Can I trust this? Like, did you actually do this? What is this? So it's hard to trust what's in front of you with all this AI stuff. And I love that you re-articulated that human connection is the whole point of all of this. So while AI can kind of help you get going, maybe do some standard, a few sections of the launch activities, or as you pointed out, do some of the analysis of, customer engagement. Do not have AI engage. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah. In fact, even in between launches, I don't record the calls, and I do that for a purpose because I want people to feel comfortable sharing examples of what's going on, and sometimes I think, oh, I really wish I did at least transcribe it so that I could automatically pull up the themes, but I'm here with my pen and paper writing down notes the old traditional way.
Yeah, good old fashioned. Yes, I love it. Okay, so when I launch my community, I guess what should that launch actually look like? I know you mentioned pilots, which is very helpful, but where do they fit into the picture when it comes to a broader launch?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think this is sometimes where things can go awry. Some teams try to go too big too fast. So I think of a pilot as a launch. Maybe it's not as big as a tier 1 launch, if you think of your product marketing tiering, but it's really get it out there, start small, focused. We talked about, around that specific problem or kind of goal, really to give them clear reason to show up. And then treat it like a product. So test and learn, see what drives engagement, where it's best to show up. And then when you start seeing people kind of showing up consistently and contributing, that's when you expand. And the nice thing about that is oftentimes you get your early adopters, oftentimes those people that first join the group can become your champions, and then they can help you grow.
Yeah, my big takeaway in what you just said is that and this goes back to tracking the metrics and success, is to track for consistency in usage. And when you're seeing a good consistency, that's kind of an indication that you're ready for the next level of scale. So I really love that. Okay, last question for you on this topic, Cara. What's one piece of advice that you have for a product marketer who is on the path to creating a community around their product?
Start with the problem. Make sure that you're focused on what that problem is. We mentioned earlier, sometimes the company and the audience can have kind of different problems. Just make sure that those are the same. You can have secondary business goals out of that, but make sure that those are the same so you can build that relevance. And don't think you have to go too big too fast. I think, all audience, it really depends on your audience and what your goals are. If you have 200,000 travel advisors, you might be able to go bigger than if you're starting something like my between launches community, right? Our goal is to have these conversations, but, test and learn and go big when you've got the right engagement.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Start with the problem.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, this was so insightful. And like I said, so timely for everything that I'm seeing. And I think product marketers are kind of itching to get at more connection with their customers, especially given how everybody's bombarded with AI. So there's so much to learn here from you, Cara, in your case study about community. And you've just repeated, success with that. So thank you again for sharing with us.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So now it's time for the next segment of the show. So this is the messaging critique. This is where we get to be product marketing experts and analyze real world marketing. And the fun part is, as my guest, Cara, you get to choose the company that we look at. So I'm going to start with some ground rules. You want to try to pick a company that is one that you either are the target audience or you know the target audience really well. It wouldn't be fair for me to analyze the messaging of like a food and beverage company because I have no idea. Like I know nothing about that. So once you reveal the company, then you're going to tell me a little bit about what's popping out at you in terms of what's working really well with the messaging, and then what you wish the PMM would have considered differently. And then we'll iterate and brainstorm a bit on how the PMM could take it to the next level, whether that's a creative campaign, content, or just make their messaging super punchy.
Sounds good.
All right. So reveal, what is the company we will look at today?
So I have selected Maven Clinic. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but I'm very passionate about what they do. I wouldn't say I'm their direct audience, but kind of their downstream audience.
Okay, I'm gonna Google them really quickly. So it's Maven Clinic. Is it just mavenclinic.com?
Yes.
Is this so on their website, at least how they present themselves to the world, it looks like evidence-based women's and family healthcare. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay, great. So for those of you who want to follow along, do you want to tell us a little bit more about like what they do? Obviously, they're a healthcare clinic of some kind.
Yeah, they're a digital healthcare. Can't say healthcare today. They're a digital healthcare platform that are focused on women's and family health. It's offered through an employer benefit. And so I would say the direct ICP is more tied to kind of the HR benefits leader versus the employee, but they still do market to the employees as well.
Interesting. Okay, so target customer then is more of the HR benefits of, good size, medium to enterprise sized employer. So what is popping out at you about the messaging? What's working really well?
I think they do a really good job of balancing emotional storytelling with business impact. I think, there's a lot of women's topics around fertility, around menopause or perimenopause or anxiety, and it's family health and women's health. But they do a really good job of that storytelling in terms of how they do improve a lot of clinical challenges, as I would say. And then they also talk about the business impact to the HR leader.
Got it. Okay, so I'm on their website right now and I'm just trying to like dig through just to get a stronger sense of like what that actually looks like. As I'm scrolling through their website, is there something like big that kind of points to that, storytelling that they do? I mean, I've seen a lot of like women and family, like, and I think that repetition, kind of works really well for who they're trying to make this for. And then they have kind of this like tile of, it looks like topics that I think you mentioned. Is that kind of what you were getting at with how they're the different topics and how they kind of like build on the storytelling?
Yeah, I think it's more in kind of the why Maven. And if you look at, I probably went beyond their website and looked at a few different things. But, if you look at some of the programs that they have, it really goes into the fertility and family building. And so it does speak a little bit more to the challenges that these audiences face. And so I think that's where this comes together more so.
Got it. Yes. Okay. So while they are speaking to kind of like the HR representative, they're still able to be very convincing around why this is so meaningful to their employees.
Yes.
Because I'm even reading just on the like fertility and family building page, it says guiding members on the shortest, most affordable path to a healthy baby while maximizing your benefits dollars. That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And
That's
so
amazing.
they speak to both of those, which I think is really, really great because they're speaking to what the employee wants to hear, in terms of what challenges or health options they might be struggling with. But then they also kind of speak to that ICP of the HR.
Totally. And those are two very different audiences to speak to. And
Yes.
and this topic, well, some of these topics anyway, some of them are very sensitive.
Yes.
So being able to do that in a way that isn't a turn off is definitely a win.
Sure.
So yeah, I'm definitely liking the storytelling here. Okay, and tell me something you wish the PMM would have considered differently.
This is going to sound a little contradictory to what I just said, but I think that, as I mentioned, I think they do a good job of balancing the emotional storytelling with the business outcomes. I think where they can get, where they can up level and enhance is tailoring it more to a direct ICP. So to your point, you mentioned them on the page, they're talking to both the employee and they're talking to the HR leader. And I think that that's good, but it feels like a lot at one time. And I think it dilutes the message if you're coming in just as an HR leader.
Which is probably the bulk of what they're getting.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think that, they do have a tab for employers where I think they do this a bit better, but I feel like if that is your true ICP, then that should be front and center on your homepage, on kind of your solutions page. And so I think that's where they can do better. They have a lot of the content already. It's just maybe structuring it in a way that is a bit different.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like maybe they need to rebuild their message house so that top level messaging is more for the ICP. And then they can they can start to introduce the more individual employee messaging down at the lower tiers of the.
Yeah, or have it, different tabs. They do have the employer tab, so I think they're going for it. But I think that, and I've never worked for this company.
Of course,
I don't have that detail, but I feel like from an external perspective, their core ICP is the HR leader. So I would have everything geared toward that, and then have a small inlay or tab or whatnot for them and the employees. So kind of flipping the script around a little bit.
Exactly. Rather than straddling the two, just pick one and go for it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What would you do to take this to the next level?
Exactly that. I would kind of change that structure a little bit, really focus on that ICP. Going through the website, this might not be the technical health terms, but you have business outcomes, and then you have what I call kind of clinical outcomes. The clinical outcomes are like, we increase fertility by X% or those sorts of things. And how do you ensure you're talking to your ICP about the item that they care about most, right? And some of those, maybe some clinical ties into retention. I can think of it, when I was at Expedia, we had a women in the workplace goal, and so I could see things around fertility like kind of being a secondary signal. But I think it's really getting clear in terms of another story. When I was so I was in sales before I went into product marketing. And one of the reasons I went into product marketing is when I was leading a sales team, they would take what marketing gave them, and it might have 6 things on it, right? And the great salespeople would take that 6 things that marketing had, and they would narrow it down to 3 to talk to their clients about. The 3 things that they knew their clients cared about. And I would say kind of the mediocre kind of salespeople would just go and kind of read off the slide. When I was in those meetings, I would just see people's eyes glaze over, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes I think when it comes to messaging, whether it be in a deck or whether it be on a website, less is more, right? Let's get really, really
100%.
clear on what they care about. And I think that they could be a little clearer here.
Oh, yes. And that's such a great example. And I think you're so right. Like if I'm, just revisiting their website, it does get a bit like repetitive, and there is kind of a lot here. Like they've got, and I'm trying not to critique on like design because I'm not a designer. What do I know about website design? Nothing. So, but you're right. It is kind of like, it would be a lot for me, even if this was all like product marketing, like if this was a product marketing company and it was the same like volume of content. It's like too much, it's putting too much ownership or onus on the customer to have to figure out what do you do? What do you offer? Et cetera. So yeah, I think that's a really strong call out. Well, still they've got the foundation. Maybe it's just rearranging a bit and focusing in on the ICP. So shout out Maven Clinic. I think, you guys are on the right track and excited to see how it iterates.
Yes, I'm actually just excited to see how this company how they perform going forward, because it's something that I'm very passionate about. So I just kind of keep tabs so far.
Oh, I love that. We're rooting for you, Maven Clinic. All right. So, Cara, one last thing I like to make space for on the podcast is a moment of gratitude, because in product marketing, none of us get here alone. We're always learning from each other, building of each other. Well, I guess we're a community of our own. So before we wrap up, I just want to say a genuine thank you for all the work that goes into putting this episode together, and all the time that you've spent, and your generosity and sharing your expertise is so helpful. So thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. And then likewise, I'd like to turn it around to you and give you a chance to give a shout out to a few PMMs who have shaped your career and brought you to, the successful point in your career that you're at today.
I love this question. Honestly, one of the things I love about the product marketing community is how open everyone is. People are always willing to share. I've reached out to different people about my consulting work when I was thinking of taking that off. I've gotten, ideas from people, just really kind of understand, other people's career progression. And I feel like everyone has this mentality of like, we're all in it together, and like, let's help each other. And so, that's a big part of why I started Between Launches, a very small but mighty group. And I feel like I learned something from that group every month. And we're even starting to get a little bit of traction in our online, our LinkedIn group. So instead of just calling out one or two people, I'd like to really call out the collective PMM community that had the biggest impact on me. Is that a cop-out, do you feel?
No, not at all. Not at all. I love it. Yeah.
I mean, there's so many great ones out there, way too many to list for sure.
I know, 100%. And I just shout out to listeners out there to check out the Between Launches community to get a sense of what Cara is talking about here, and get a piece of some of that goodness that you're getting, that, the sounding board and a place to go and get feedback, share ideas. I think that's, just is such a value add. And it's the whole, it truly is part of the definition that you laid out. It's just at the start of the episode for what a community is. All right. So my last question for you is, where else can we access your expertise? Is it best to just find you on LinkedIn?
Yes, that's probably the best. I try to put some, kind of thought leadership content out there. The Between Launches community is there. Feel free to, connect, DM. I'm usually pretty quick at following up. But yeah, I'd love to get to know you.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much, Cara. And hey, PMM listeners, if you liked this episode, please share it with a PMM friend. And I would be so grateful if you would leave a review or hit subscribe. It helps tremendously with our reach. Thank you so much for coming with us on this adventure today. I hope this episode leaves you with inspiration to take in the next step of your own journey.